On a stormy night in June 1941, a Bristol Beaufort, the RAF's first monoplane torpedo bomber, roared through black clouds on the kind of daring mission it was designed for, attacking the German heavy cruiser Lützow, recently spotted off the coast of Norway. As it fought against the howling winds and turbulent skies, this Beaufort had somehow separated from the rest of the RAF's 42nd Squadron and was now flying solo. Flight Sergeant Ray Lovett gripped the controls tightly. The 22-year-old pilot wasn't normally superstitious, but on this Friday the 13th, the odds felt particularly grim. As the North Sea waves began to shimmer with the first light of dawn, Lovett's heart skipped a beat. There, cutting through the horizon, was the unmistakable silhouette of Lützow. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. But unlike his Beaufort, the heavy cruiser wasn't alone. Surrounding her were 4 destroyers, their guns bristling in the dim light, and a swarm of Junkers Ju-88s and Messerschmitt Bf-110s patrolling the skies. Getting the bomber close enough to Lützow to drop its payload would require nerves of steel and a stroke of luck. Lovett's mind raced as he observed the recognition signals exchanged between the German aircraft and the ships. Mimicking these signals was a long shot, but it was his only chance. He held his breath as he sent the coded blinks. To his amazement, the Germans accepted his Beaufort as one of their own. Created by the Bristol Aeroplane Company in response to a 1935 call from the Air Ministry for a land-based twin-engine torpedo bomber, the Beaufort began life as the Bristol Type 152 before being rechristened to honor the Duke of Beaufort, whose ancestral home was not far from Bristol's Filton factory. As the RAF's need for a new torpedo bomber was considered urgent, both the Beaufort and a competing design from rival manufacturer Blackburn, the Botha, were ordered straight off the drawing board. Initially, 320 Beauforts were commissioned. At the time, Bristol was focused on the production of their previous bomber, the Blenheim, so it was decided that they would build 78 units, while the remaining 242 would be assigned to Blackburn. However, these allocations would later change as production demands evolved. Though the Beaufort bore a resemblance to the Blenheim, it was a significantly larger and more powerful aircraft. The wingspan was extended by 18 inches, and the fuselage was lengthened and heightened to accommodate a 4th crew member, making the Beaufort considerably heavier than its predecessor. The bomb bay was expanded to carry a semi-recessed torpedo or a conventional bomb of up to 2,000 pounds. The Beaufort required more power than the Blenheim's Bristol Mercury engines could provide, so it was initially equipped with the more powerful Bristol Perseus motors. However, it soon became clear that even these engines couldn't give the Beaufort the necessary speed. The solution was to switch to the Bristol Taurus engines, designed with low-drag NACA cowlings by chief designer Roy Fedden. These cowlings had innovative vertical slots flanking the nacelles under the wings, allowing for controlled airflow through adjustable flaps. Other refinements that the Beaufort brought to the Blenheim's basic structure included high-strength light alloy forgings and extrusions to replace the older bomber's high-tensile steel plates, making the structure lighter. The wing center section was integrated into the fuselage, and the nacelle structure was part of the main ribs, which supported the main undercarriage units. These were larger than those on the Blenheim and used hydraulic retraction, with an emergency lowering system operated by a cartridge. In mid-1938, the first prototype of the Bristol Beaufort rolled out of the Filton factory. However, testing would get off to a rocky start. The Taurus engines persistently overheated during ground tests, necessitating a redesign of the engine cowlings. New cowlings with circumferential cooling gills were developed and installed, causing delays. Despite these setbacks, the Beaufort took to the skies for the first time on October 15, 1938. As flight testing progressed, another issue emerged. The large apron-type undercarriage doors, based on the ones in the Blenheim, caused the aircraft to yaw during landing. The doors were removed for subsequent flights to address this. More conventional split doors were used on the second prototype and all production models, leaving a small part of the tires exposed when retracted, effectively solving the yaw problem. However, further challenges presented themselves when high-level bombing tests were conducted at Boscombe Down. Flying at 10,000 feet at 238 miles per hour, the aircraft's test pilot described it as, quote, an exceptionally poor bombing platform. These impressions were due to the excessive and continuous rolling, making it extremely difficult to determine drift and achieve bombing accuracy. Despite the Beaufort's flaws, the specter of war was now looming large on the horizon. Demand was high, and not just in Britain. In July 1939, the Australian government placed an order for 180 Beaufort airframes and spares, to bolster Australia and Singapore's defenses against the growing threat of Japanese expansionism, and 3 months later, engines, components, and support equipment were shipped out to be put together on arrival. However, with World War II now underway, speculation that shipping further Tauruses from Britain could become complicated led to the decision to replace them with Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp engines, which could either be locally made or imported from the US. Other differences of the Australian Beaufort included a larger fin. Meanwhile, back in Britain, production began in earnest in November 1939, with the first units entering service in January 1940 with the 22nd Squadron of RAF Coastal Command, which until then had been made up of Vickers Wildebeest biplanes. The Beaufort was significantly heavier and faster than the Wildebeest, which necessitated extensive crew training in new torpedo-dropping techniques. The lighter, slower biplanes could dive and then flatten out before launching a torpedo, but the Beaufort's higher speed after a dive required greater skill. Achieving a successful hit required the payload to be dropped at exactly the right height, which for 18-inch Mark 12 torpedoes was around 68 feet. With no radio altimeter to guide them, it was common for pilots to misjudge this, causing the torpedo to skip across the water, known as porpoising, or even dive or break up. Many pilots flying the Beaufort found it difficult to correctly analyze the speed and range of their target ships, which tended to look bigger than they were. This would often lead to the pilots underestimating the range and releasing the torpedoes too early, missing the mark. With these challenges compounded by a shortage of torpedoes, it was decided the 22nd Squadron's initial operations with the Beaufort would instead involve laying magnetic mines, known as gardening in RAF terminology, as well as conventional bombing raids. April 1940 saw the Beaufort incorporated into 42nd Squadron and its first operational mission, in which 9 aircraft embarked on a daring mine-laying sortie in the Schillig Roads, north of Wilhelmshaven. However, 1 aircraft failed to return due to issues with the Taurus engines, a pattern repeated in subsequent missions. 9 Beauforts from 42nd Squadron made an attempted attack on the German battleship Scharnhorst in June 1940, but only 4 made it back. In the days that followed, a court of inquiry determined that the engine reliability was a critical problem. Consequently, both 22nd and 42nd Squadrons were grounded until necessary modifications could be made. Once back in the air, 5 Beauforts from 22nd Squadron finally conducted the RAF's first torpedo attack of World War II on September 11, 1940, against a 3-ship merchant convoy off the Belgian coast. 1 torpedo successfully hit its target. However, with doubts still lingering about the reliability of the Taurus engine, Bristol launched the Beaufort Mark II, which featured the twin Wasp engines used by the Australian version. With the new and improved Beaufort making its first flight in November 1940, it would be the following year that the Bristol Beaufort would truly come into its own, as the torpedo bomber it was designed to be. In the early hours of April 6, 1941, 22nd Squadron executed a daring raid on the German battleship Gneisenau at Brest, in northwestern France. Gneisenau, a significant threat due to its Atlantic raiding missions, was undergoing repairs when 6 Beaufort bombers, led by Wing Commander Ken Campbell, launched their attack. Despite struggling through heavy rain, thick sea mist, and intense anti-aircraft fire, Campbell skillfully navigated his aircraft at a dangerously low altitude and released a torpedo that struck the battleship near its stern, causing substantial damage. Campbell and his crew were lost in the explosion's aftermath, but their bravery rendered Gneisenau inoperable for several months, providing critical relief to Allied shipping and earning Campbell a posthumous Victoria Cross. Just over 2 months later, word came through that the German heavy cruiser Lützow had been sighted near Norway, with an escort consisting of 4 destroyers as well as several aircraft. Lützow had originally been called Deutschland, but it's said that Hitler was so scared of the negative consequences for German morale should they lose a ship that bore the country's name that he decided to change it. Having played a key role in Operation Weserübung, Germany's 1940 invasion of Norway and Denmark, the heavy cruiser represented a major threat to the Allies, so they did not hesitate in going after her. On June 12, 1941, 13 Bristol Beauforts from 42nd Squadron set off into the stormy night from RAF Luchar in Fife on the east coast of Scotland. Among their number was young Flight Sergeant Ray Lovett, whose Beaufort was said to be 5 knots slower than the others in the squadron, and assigned the letter W, known as W for wreck. Around midnight, a signal from a Blenheim of 114th Squadron pinpointed the location of the German ships. Nevertheless, most of the Beaufort bombers struggled to find their targets, but not Lovett in W, which had become separated from the main force. Showing impressive bravery and cunning, Leavitt took the German cruiser Lützow by surprise. Rather than attacking immediately, Leavitt cleverly lingered in the area, mimicking the behavior of a German escort plane. By imitating the recognition signals exchanged between German aircraft and ships, Leavitt managed to blend in without arousing suspicion. Seizing the opportune moment, he launched his torpedo at Lützow, striking her port side. The impact caused the cruiser to list heavily and lose all speed. Additionally, the hit triggered Lützow's smokescreen generator, which obscured the target and caused another attacking Beaufort to miss. Even though Leavitt's plane was soon shot down, his daring attack significantly damaged Lützow, putting her out of action for 6 months while she underwent repairs. However, subsequent missions would highlight the Beaufort's weaknesses. On February 12, 1942, the German Kriegsmarine conducted Operation Cerberus, which consisted of a channel dash by Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen back to Germany from Brest. 28 Beauforts were sent out to try and stop them, but of these, 13 failed to locate the ships, 3 were shot down, and 1 experienced a malfunction when the moment came to release its torpedo. The remaining 11 did fire their torpedoes, but all missed. Reflecting upon this dismal failure, a further court of inquiry concluded that it was time for a faster, longer-range torpedo bomber to replace the Beaufort. This idea was confirmed by a final British-based Beaufort mission in May 1942, when an attempted attack on Prinz Eugen turned out to be a disaster, with several Beauforts shot down, others forced to jettison their torpedoes, and the rest missing the target. Rather than producing more Beauforts, Bristol instead focused on their heavy fighter version, the Beaufighter, giving it the option to carry torpedoes and thus serve as a replacement for the Beaufort. Meanwhile, most of the remaining Beauforts were moved to the Mediterranean theater, where they saw some success, most notably participating in the sinking of the Italian ships Victoria and Trento, as well as causing serious damage to German convoys supplying Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps. Likewise, as part of the Royal Australian Air Force, the Beaufort was far more prolific than it had been in Britain. Aviation historian William Green even went so far as to say that the Beaufort's, quote, part in the defeat of the Japanese forces in the Southwest Pacific was probably of greater importance than that of any other single aircraft type. One particularly significant contribution came on January 2, 1944, when Beaufort squadrons dropped over 71,000 pounds of bombs on the Lakunai airfield and other targets around Rabaul, New Britain, causing major damage to Japanese infrastructure and hindering their air operations. After the war, the Beaufort was retired from service by both the RAF and the RAAF. While the Bristol Beaufort was not particularly effective and was often seen as a disappointment due to its engine reliability issues and limited success in some operations, it left a lasting legacy through its versatility and technological advancements, paving the way for the Bristol Beaufighter, which proved to be more effective. Today, Beauforts can be seen at the Royal Air Force Museum, London, as well as several museums and war memorials in Australia.